The great hull of Vareth Prime had never felt so cold, and Ambassador Rilith could sense the fear that hung in the air like poison, thick and suffocating as representatives from 12 different species gathered for what many believed would be their final council meeting. The Keth Dominion had come, and nothing in the known galaxy could stop them. Rilith stood at the central podium, his blue-scaled hands trembling as he activated the holographic display that showed the devastation across Allied territory, and the images were horrifying beyond words. 3 colony worlds had already fallen, their populations either dead or enslaved, and the Keth war fleet continued its advance with terrifying speed. "We have perhaps 30 cycles before they reach the core worlds," Rilith announced, his voice heavy with exhaustion, and he watched as panic rippled through the assembled delegates. "Our combined fleets have been unable to slow their advance, and we are running out of options." Admiral Karath of the Vellani Defense Fleet rose from his seat, his forearms crossed in frustration as he addressed the council with barely contained anger. "Options?" he repeated with disgust. "What options do we have left, Ambassador? The Keth outnumber us 3-1, and their weapons technology is superior to anything we possess. We should be discussing evacuation, not strategy." Murmurs of agreement spread through the chamber, and Rilith felt his hope crumbling like sand through his fingers. In the far corner of the hall, a young Varan archivist named Selith listened to the despair of her leaders with growing frustration. She had spent her entire life studying the ancient records, the text that most scholars dismissed as fantasy, and she knew something that the council had forgotten. She raised her hand, and when no one acknowledged her, she stood and spoke anyway. "There is another option." Every eye in the chamber turned toward her, and Admiral Korath let out a dismissive sound. "And who are you to address this council?" "I am Selith, keeper of the ancient archives," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And I have spent 20 cycles studying records that date back 12,000 years, records that speak of a species that could help us." Rilith tilted his head with curiosity. "What species?" Selith activated her personal display and projected images of old texts onto the main screen. They were called humans, and they came from a world named Earth in a distant arm of the galaxy. According to these records, they were Deathworlders from one of the most hostile planets ever documented. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the chamber. "Deathworlders are a myth," Admiral Korath declared. "Stories told to frighten children. No species could evolve on a world with the conditions described in those old tales." "The records are very specific," Selith insisted. "Earth had extreme gravity, violent weather patterns, toxic atmospheric components, and predators that could kill with a single strike. The humans who evolved there were unlike anything else in the galaxy. They were persistent beyond reason, adaptive beyond measure, and fiercely protective of those they considered allies." Another delegate, a thin insectoid creature from the Moth Collective, clicked in amusement. "Even if these humans existed, the records say their world was destroyed in a stellar event thousands of cycles ago. They are extinct." "The records say Earth was believed to be destroyed," Selith corrected. "No one ever confirmed it. We simply lost contact and assumed the worst." Ambassador Rilith studied the young archivist with growing interest. "What exactly do these records say about human military capability?" Selith scrolled through the ancient texts. "They say that humans were the most dangerous species ever encountered, not because of their technology, but because of their nature. They never surrendered. They never stopped fighting. And they had a concept called sacrifice, where individuals would willingly die to protect others. The records describe them as pack hunters who could coordinate without communication, predict enemy movements, and adapt to any situation within moments." Admiral Korath slammed his fist on his console. "This is fantasy. We cannot base our survival on children's stories." "Then what do you suggest, Admiral?" Rilith asked quietly. You said yourself that we cannot win this war with conventional means. If there is even a chance that these humans exist, should we not try? The chamber fell silent. High Commander Zeth of the Keth Dominion had sent his ultimatum that very morning, and the words still burned in Rilith's mind. Surrender unconditionally or face complete annihilation. There would be no negotiation, no mercy, and no survivors. Rilith made his decision. Seleth, did the records mention any way to contact the humans? The young archivist nodded. There is an ancient frequency listed in the texts, a channel that was supposedly monitored by human outposts. No one has transmitted on it in thousands of cycles. Then we will transmit on it now, Rilith declared. We will send a message into the void and hope that someone is listening. Admiral Korath shook his head in disbelief. You are placing our survival in the hands of a legend. I am placing our survival in the hands of hope, Rilith replied. It is all we have left. The technicians worked quickly to configure the transmission array, and within the hour, they were ready. Seleth helped compose the message, using phrases from the ancient texts that she hoped the humans would recognize. The signal was broadcast across the stars, a desperate plea for help sent to a species that most believed had never existed. Rilith stood at the window of his chamber afterward, staring out at the stars that had suddenly become hostile territory. He did not truly believe that anyone would answer. The humans were almost certainly a myth, a story created by ancient species to explain their own survival against impossible odds. But as he watched the distant lights flicker in the darkness, he allowed himself one small moment of hope. Perhaps the legends were true. Perhaps somewhere out there, the humans were listening. And perhaps, just perhaps, they would answer the call. Seleth joined him at the window, her young eyes reflecting the starlight. Do you think they will come, Ambassador? Rilith was silent for a long moment. I think that if the stories are true, if the humans are everything the records claim, then they are exactly the kind of species that would answer a call for help from strangers they have never met. Why would anyone do that? Seleth asked. The ambassador smiled sadly. That is what makes them legendary. In the darkness of space, the signal raced outward at the speed of light, carrying with it the hopes of billions of beings who faced extinction. And in a distant corner of the galaxy, on a blue and green world that had been forgotten by the stars, someone was about to hear it. Lieutenant Amy Torres was 3 hours into her night shift at the Luna listening post when her equipment suddenly went crazy, and she nearly spilled her coffee all over the console. The frequency was ancient, something that had been dormant for over 10,000 years, according to the historical records. No one had ever expected it to activate, and most technicians considered it a relic from a forgotten age. But now it was screaming with activity. Amy ran a diagnostic to make sure her equipment was not malfunctioning, and when everything came back normal, she felt her heart begin to race. This was real. Someone was transmitting on a channel that had been silent since before humans left Earth. She immediately contacted her commanding officer. Commander Shaw, you need to see this right now. Commander Kevin Shaw arrived in the monitoring room within minutes, his gray hair still messy from sleep, and he stared at the display with disbelief. That frequency has been dead for millennia. Are you sure this is not an error? I ran every diagnostic I could think of, Amy replied. The signal is genuine, and it is structured. This is not random noise, Commander. Someone is trying to communicate. Shaw leaned closer to the console, his eyes narrowing as he studied the patterns. Can you decode it? The translation software is struggling, Amy admitted. The language does not match anything in our current databases, but there are fragments that correspond to the Mars Archive files. The Mars Archive was legendary in its own right. When humanity first colonized Mars 3 centuries ago, they had discovered ruins of an ancient outpost buried beneath the red dust. The outpost contained records that proved extraterrestrial life existed. But more importantly, it proved that aliens had visited Earth thousands of years ago and remembered humanity. The records suggested that humans had been forgotten by the galactic community, dismissed as a primitive species that had probably destroyed itself long ago. Shaw made a decision. I am escalating this to UNSC Command immediately. Within hours, the signal had reached the desk of Admiral Daniel Carter at United Nations Space Command headquarters in Geneva. Carter was a veteran of the colony wars and the current head of the First Contact Division, a department that most people considered a joke since no contact had ever been made. But Carter had always believed that humanity was not alone, and now he had proof. He assembled a team of the best minds available. Dr. Patricia Lane was a xenolinguist who'd spent her entire career studying the Mars archive fragments. Captain Laura Bennett was the commander of the exploration vessel, Horizon's Edge, and one of the most respected officers in the fleet. Together, they worked through the night to decode the alien transmission. Dr. Lane made the breakthrough just before dawn. "It is a distress call," she announced, her voice trembling with excitement. "Multiple species are facing extinction from a conquering empire. They are asking for help from anyone who can hear them." Admiral Carter studied the translation. "Is there anything specific about who they are trying to contact?" Dr. Lane nodded slowly. "At the end of the message, there is a direct address. They are calling for the humans of Earth." The room fell silent. Captain Bennett was the first to speak. "They remember us?" "More than that," Dr. Lane replied. "According to this translation, they believe we might be their only hope. They are describing us as legendary warriors, Deathworlders from a hostile planet. They think we might be the only species capable of stopping this enemy." Admiral Carter walked to the window and stared out at the morning sky. How long ago was this signal sent? Given the distance and transmission speed, approximately 30 of their time cycles, which translates to roughly 15 Earth days. "Then they have been waiting for an answer for 2 weeks," Carter said quietly. "And every day we delay, more of them die." He called an emergency session of the UN Security Council, and the debate that followed was fierce. Some argued that humanity should stay hidden. They did not know what was out there, and revealing themselves could bring danger to Earth. Others argued that this was humanity's chance to finally join the galactic community. Admiral Carter listened to the arguments, and when it was his turn to speak, he stood before the assembled leaders with quiet determination. Throughout our history, humanity has faced moments where we had to choose who we wanted to be. He began. We could choose safety, isolation, and self-preservation. We could hide in our corner of the galaxy and pretend we never heard this call. But that is not who we are. He activated a display showing the decoded message. Somewhere out there, billions of beings are facing annihilation. They sent a signal into the darkness hoping someone would hear. They called for humanity specifically because they remembered what our ancestors were capable of. They remembered that humans do not abandon those in need. Carter looked at each face in the room. If we ignore this call, we are not protecting ourselves. We are betraying everything that makes us human. We have always been at our best when we stand together against those who would harm the innocent. This is our moment to show the galaxy what humanity truly represents. The vote was close, but in the end, humanity chose to answer. Captain Bennett was given command of a fleet consisting of 12 warships led by the carrier Starfall. Sergeant Marcus Cole and his Marine unit were assigned to the mission, and within days, the fleet was ready to depart. Amy Torres watched from the Luna station as the ships gathered information. She had never imagined that her routine night shift would lead to this, and she felt a strange mix of fear and pride. Commander Shaw stood beside her. "You started something incredible tonight, Lieutenant." Amy shook her head. "I just heard the call, Commander. They are the ones answering it." The fleet engaged their faster-than-light drives, and in a flash of brilliant light, they vanished into the stars. Sergeant Cole sat with his Marines in the transport bay of the Starfall, checking his weapons and reviewing the limited intelligence they had about the enemy. His soldiers were the best humanity had to offer, and they were ready for whatever waited for them. Captain Bennett stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the starfield ahead. She did not know what they would find at the end of this journey, but she knew one thing for certain. Someone had called for help, and humanity had answered. That was all that mattered. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Allied territory, and Captain Laura Bennett immediately knew they had arrived in the middle of a war. The sensor displays lit up with thousands of contacts, energy signatures flashing across the screen as massive warships exchanged fire in the darkness of space. The Allied fleet was clearly losing, their defensive lines crumbling under the relentless assault of the enemy. "Report," Bennett ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos unfolding before them. "We are detecting approximately 400 Allied vessels engaged with over 1,000 enemy ships," her tactical officer replied. "The Allied formation is breaking apart. They will be overrun within hours." Bennett studied the battlefield with experienced eyes. She could see the pattern of the enemy attack, the way they used overwhelming numbers to crush resistance. It was brutal, but effective. "Captain, we need to make a decision," her first officer said. "Do we announce ourselves diplomatically, or do we enter the fight directly?" Bennett considered the options for only a moment. "If we waste time on diplomacy, those ships will be destroyed before we finish introductions. We came here to help, and that is exactly what we are going to do." She opened a channel to the fleet. "All ships, this is Captain Bennett. We are going in. Protect the Allied vessels and engage the enemy. Show them what humanity is made of." The 12 human warships accelerated toward the battle, their engines burning bright against the darkness. On the surface of Verith Prime, Ambassador Rilith had given up hope. 30 cycles had passed since they sent the signal, and nothing had come. The Keth fleet was hours away from their final assault, and the Allied defenses were collapsing. Admiral Korath appeared on his communication screen, his face grim. "Ambassador, I am ordering all civilian transports to begin evacuation immediately. My fleet will hold the line as long as possible, but we cannot stop them." "I am sorry." Rilith nodded wearily. "Thank you for everything you have done, Admiral. History will remember your courage." He ended the call and sat in silence, watching the stars through his window. The legends had failed them. The humans were not coming. Perhaps they had never existed at all. In the archives below, young Selith refused to give up. She sat at her monitoring station, scanning every frequency, hoping against hope that someone would answer. Her colleagues had already evacuated, but she could not bring herself to leave. And then she heard it. A transmission on the ancient frequency, the same channel they had used to send their distress call. A voice was speaking in a language her translator struggled to process, but slowly the words became clear. "This is Captain Laura Bennett of the United Earth Fleet. We received your signal. We are here to help. Tell us where you need us." Selith stared at her console in disbelief. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely operate the controls. "Ambassador Rilith," she shouted into her communicator. "Ambassador, you need to hear this." Within minutes, the entire council had gathered around the communication system. They listened to the human transmission in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were hearing. Admiral Korath was the first to speak. "This could be a Keth trick. How do we know these are really humans?" Captain Bennett responded by transmitting visual confirmation. Images of human ships appeared on the screen, followed by images of human faces. They looked exactly as the ancient records had described. Soft skin, forward-facing eyes, and expressions that somehow conveyed both determination and compassion. Rillis felt tears forming in his eyes. "They came," he whispered. The legends were true. He activated his transmitter with trembling hands. "Captain Bennett, this is Ambassador Rilith of the Voron Collective. Our fleet is pinned down in Sector 7. The Keth command ship is directing the assault from behind their lines. We cannot hold much longer." Bennett's response was immediate. "Understood, Ambassador. Hold on. We are coming to you." The human fleet cut through the battle zone like a blade through water. Keth ships that moved to intercept were met with devastating firepower, and the enemy formation began to shift as commanders tried to respond to this unexpected threat. High Commander Zeth stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the battle unfold with growing confusion. "What are those ships?" he demanded. "They do not match any known species in our database." His tactical officer worked frantically at his console. "Commander, the identification came back. These are humans. Deathworlders from a planet called Earth." Zeth felt a flicker of unease. He had heard the old stories about humans, tales passed down through generations of Keth warriors. They spoke of a species so dangerous that even the ancient empires had left them alone. But those were just stories. "Humans are extinct," he declared. "They have been gone for thousands of cycles. These must be imposters using old identification codes." "Commander, they are real," the tactical officer insisted. "Their ship designs match the fragments in our historical archives. The humans have returned." Zeth watched as a Keth cruiser exploded under human fire. Another followed, then another. These newcomers fought with a ferocity he had never seen, their tactics unpredictable and devastatingly effective. "They are only 12 ships," he reminded himself. "We have over 1,000. They cannot change the outcome of this battle." But even as he spoke, he could see his fleet beginning to falter. The humans were not fighting like any other species. They did not form neat lines or follow predictable patterns. They moved like predators, hunting in packs, striking from unexpected angles. Captain Bennett directed her fleet with precision. "Starfall Squadron, focus fire on their left flank. Eagle Group, draw their attention and create an opening." The Allied ships that had been retreating suddenly found themselves with room to breathe. Keth vessels that had been pressing the attack were now turning to face this new enemy. Admiral Karath watched from his command ship as the impossible unfolded before him. "They are actually pushing them back," he said in amazement. "How is this possible?" He opened a channel to Captain Bennett. "Captain, I must know something. Why did you come? Why are you risking your lives for species you have never met?" Bennett's answer was simple. "Someone asked for help. That is all the reason humans have ever needed." Korath was silent for a long moment. Then, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. The legends had come to life, and the galaxy would never be the same. The battle above Vareth Prime had become a storm of fire and metal, and at the center of that storm, humanity was showing the galaxy exactly why the ancient species had remembered them with such fear and respect. Captain Laura Bennett stood on the bridge of the Starfall, her eyes never leaving the tactical display as she directed her fleet with the precision of a master chess player. Every order was calculated, every maneuver designed to maximize damage while minimizing exposure. "Eagle Group, pull back and draw their cruisers into the debris field," she commanded. "Starfall Squadron, prepare for flanking attack on my signal." The Keth commanders were struggling to adapt. They had conquered dozens of species using the same tactics, overwhelming their enemies with superior numbers and firepower. But humans did not fight like other species. Where the Allied fleets formed neat defensive lines, humans fought like pack hunters. They split into small groups, struck from unexpected angles, and vanished before the Keth could concentrate fire. When one human ship was targeted, 3 others would appear at the enemy's rear, unleashing devastating attacks. High Commander Zeth watched his fleet beginning to fracture and felt something he had not experienced in decades of conquest. Fear. How are they doing this? He demanded. They are outnumbered 100-1. His tactical officer shook his head in confusion. Their coordination is unlike anything we have encountered, Commander. They seem to anticipate our movements before we make them. It is as if they can read our minds. Zeth slammed his fist on his console. They are not reading our minds. They are simply better at this than we expected. Adapt your tactics. But every time the Keth adapted, the humans adapted faster. When the Keth spread their formation to avoid concentrated fire, humans exploited the gaps. When they tightened their lines, humans used the debris field for cover and ambushed them from the shadows. Sergeant Marcus Cole and his Marines were aboard a transport heading toward a crippled Keth cruiser. Their mission was to capture the ship's data core, which contained vital information about the enemy fleet deployment. 30 seconds to breach, the pilot announced. Cole checked his weapon one final time and looked at his soldiers. We going fast and we hit hard. These Keth have never fought humans before. Let us show them why they should have stayed home. The transport latched onto the Keth hull, and the Marines cut through with breaching charges. Cole was the first through the opening, his weapon firing before his boots touched the deck. The Keth soldiers inside were massive, standing 2 meters tall with armored scales and claws that could tear through metal. They had conquered countless species who surrendered at the mere sight of them. But Cole and his Marines did not surrender. The firefight was brutal and close, exactly the kind of combat that humans excelled at. Cole moved through the corridors with deadly efficiency, putting down enemy after enemy with precise shots. His Marines covered each other, advancing as a single unit, each soldier knowing exactly where their teammates would be. A Keth warrior lunged at Cole, claws slashing. Cole ducked under the attack, drove his combat knife into the creature's side, and kept moving without breaking stride. Data core is ahead, his tech specialist called out. 2 more corridors. They pushed forward, leaving a trail of fallen enemies behind them. The Keth had never experienced anything like this. Other species fought defensively, trying to survive. Humans fought to win, and they did not stop until the job was done. Cole's team reached the data core and downloaded everything they could find. The information revealed the location of High Commander Zeth's flagship and the command, frequencies he used to coordinate his fleet. Captain Bennett, we have the data, Cole reported. Transmitting now. Bennett received the information and immediately saw the opportunity. All ships, focus on Sector 12. Their command ship is hiding behind their main line. If we can take out their commander, their coordination will collapse. The human fleet began to push toward the Keth flagship, and Zeth realized what they were planning. They are coming for me, he said with disbelief. They actually think they can reach my ship through 1,000 vessels. He ordered his fleet to form a defensive screen around the flagship, but Admiral Karath saw the opportunity and committed the Allied reserves to the fight. For the first time, the Keth found themselves pressed from multiple directions. Captain Bennett pushed the Starfall to the front of the human formation. Her ship took hit after hit, shields failing, hull sections venting atmosphere. Crew members died at their stations, but no one retreated. Captain, we cannot take much more of this, her first officer warned. Our shields are at 10%. Then transfer all remaining power to weapons and engines, Bennett ordered. We are going to punch a hole through their line. The Starfall accelerated directly toward the Keth formation, firing everything it had. Enemy ships tried to block the path but were blown apart by the carrier's main guns. The human ship carved a path of destruction through the enemy fleet. Admiral Karath watched from his command ship and turned to his aide. The legends never mentioned that humans were insane. Seleth, who was monitoring the battle from Vareth Prime, smiled despite her fear. Perhaps that is why the legend survived. The other human ships followed the starfall through the gap, and suddenly they were within striking distance of the Keth flagship. Zeth ordered all weapons to target the human carrier. Destroy that ship. I do not care what it costs. The Keth flagship opened fire with its main batteries, and the starfall shuddered under the impact. More hull breaches. More casualties. The ship was dying, but Captain Bennett refused to turn away. All weapons. Target their flagship, she commanded. Fire everything. The starfall unleashed its final barrage, and beam after beam struck the Keth command ship. The massive vessel's shields flickered and failed under the sustained assault. Other human ships added their fire to the attack, and the Keth flagship began to break apart. High Commander Zeth stared at the destruction around him and finally understood what the ancient records had tried to warn his ancestors about. Humans did not fight to survive. They fought to protect. And there was nothing in the galaxy more dangerous than a human protecting someone they cared about. The battle was not over yet, but the tide had turned, and humanity was just getting started. The Keth flagship was burning, and High Commander Zeth knew that everything he had built was collapsing around him. His command deck was filled with smoke and the screams of dying soldiers, and the tactical displays showed his fleet falling into chaos. Without his coordination, the Keth captains were making individual decisions, and those decisions were leading to disaster. Sergeant Marcus Cole and his Marines breached the flagship's hull moments after the human fleet's devastating attack. They fought through corridor after corridor, stepping over the bodies of Keth warriors who had tried and failed to stop them. Cole reached the command bridge and kicked open the reinforced door. Inside, he found High Commander Zeth standing amid the wreckage of his command center, surrounded by the bodies of his personal guard. The Keth warlord was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, with scales that could deflect most weapons and claws that had torn apart countless enemies. He looked at the humans standing before him and laughed. So this is what the legendary Deathworlders look like, Zeth said with contempt. You are small, fragile. My ancestors must have been cowards to fear such pathetic creatures. Cole said nothing. He simply raised his weapon. Zeth lunged forward with incredible speed, his claws slashing toward the human's throat. But Cole had been waiting for exactly that move. He sidestepped the attack, fired 3 precise shots into the gaps in Zeth's armor, and watched as the mighty warlord collapsed to the deck. Zeth stared up at his killer with fading eyes. How? He gasped. How did you know? Cole knelt beside him. Because we have been fighting things bigger and stronger than us since we learned to walk. You were not the first, and you will not be the last. The High Commander died without another word, and with his death, the Keth Empire's invasion came to an end. Word of Zeth's defeat spread quickly through the Keth fleet, and ship after ship began to surrender. The warriors who had terrorized the galaxy for generations discovered that their courage disappeared along with their leader. On the bridge of the damaged Starfall, Captain Bennett watched the enemy fleet stand down and allowed herself a moment of exhaustion. Her ship was barely holding together, and they had lost too many good people. Her first officer approached with a report. Captain, the Keth have surrendered unconditionally. The Allied fleet is moving in to accept their terms. Bennett nodded slowly. And our casualties? 47 dead across the fleet, including 18 from the Starfall. Another 130 wounded. Every death was a tragedy, but Bennett knew it could have been much worse. They had faced a fleet 100 times their size and emerged victorious. The people who had given their lives had done so to save billions. On Vareth Prime, the celebration began before the battle was even officially over. Beings of a dozen different species danced in the streets, crying tears of joy as they realized that extinction had been avoided. Ambassador Rilith watched the celebrations from his office window and felt a peace he had not experienced in years. They had survived. Against all odds, against every logical prediction, they had survived. A message arrived from Admiral Karth. Ambassador, the human ships are requesting permission to land. Captain Bennett wishes to meet with you in person. Rilith straightened his robes and prepared to welcome humanity to Verth Prime. The human shuttles landed in the central plaza, and crowds gathered to witness history. They had heard the legends all their lives, stories of terrible warriors from a death world, and they expected to see monsters. Instead, they saw people. The humans who emerged from the shuttles were tired and wounded, their uniforms stained with battle. But they smiled at the gathered crowd, waved at children who stared with wide eyes, and accepted the gratitude of those they had saved with humble grace. Captain Bennett met Ambassador Rilith at the steps of the council building. The ambassador struggled to find words adequate for the moment. Captain Bennett, I do not know how to thank you, he finally said. You answered a call sent into the darkness with no hope of response. You risked everything for species you had never met. Why would anyone do that? Bennett thought about the question for a moment. Because we know what it feels like to face extinction alone. Humanity nearly destroyed itself more than once. We understand the darkness you were facing, and we would never wish that on anyone. Admiral Karth approached with a different question on his mind. What happens now, Captain? Will humanity claim territory in payment for your service? Will you demand tribute? That is what conquerors do. Bennett shook her head. We are not conquerors, Admiral. We came to help, nothing more. If the allied species want, humanity would be honored to be your friends. That is all we ask. Karth stared at her for a long moment, then did something no one had ever seen him do. He bowed his head in respect. Young Seleth pushed through the crowd with an ancient tablet in her hands. She approached Captain Bennett nervously and showed her the text that had described humanity thousands of years ago. Bennett read the words slowly, her eyes widening as she understood how her ancestors had been remembered. Humans are dangerous, the text read. Humans are relentless, but humans protect what they love. If you are their friend, they will burn the stars to keep you safe. Bennett smiled and handed the tablet back to Seleth. Well, they got at least one thing right. Back on Earth, Admiral Carter received news of the victory with quiet satisfaction. Humanity's isolation was over. They were no longer alone in the universe. And their first impression had not been as conquerors or destroyers, but as allies who answered when no one else would. Dr. Patricia Lane began work on formal diplomatic protocols. Lieutenant Amy Torres received hundreds of new signals from across the galaxy as word spread. The humans were real, and they had come to help. The Allied Council sent an official invitation to Earth within days. Humanity was asked to join the Galactic Assembly as full members, taking their place among the stars they had always dreamed of reaching. Ambassador Rilith addressed the assembly with words that would become famous throughout the galaxy. We called into the void hoping for a miracle, he said. What answered was something better. Humanity does not perform miracles. They simply refuse to accept that some things are impossible. They came to us not because they had to, but because someone asked for help. And for humanity, that has always been enough. The humans in attendance accepted the honor with humility. They had not sought glory or recognition. They had simply done what humans had always done. They had answered the call, and the galaxy would never forget it.